I'm beating Spider-Man Miles Morales without dealing damage. I can't punch, kick, use venom, or do anything like that. I'll have to win with webs, throwable items, and whatever weird strategies I can find. To start out, we swing over to Rhino, who uses his clunky elbow to let all the prisoners out. Now here's our first taste of the game, making us use an attack that we just learned as a tutorial. But luckily, the mailboxes are still here for the rest of the fight. After we caught up to Rhino and got into the fight, I realized something. I have to attack. There's no way around this, so I just made myself beat him on Spectacular, the hardest difficulty, without taking damage. It was pretty tough, but I was able to get through with some practice. After this, Peter Parker leaves us all alone so he can go on vacation. While crying, we find a gift that he left us, a new suit. And I wasn't trying to disrespect the gesture, so I put it on and made a rule that this is the only suit I'm allowed to use. Then he gave us some glitchy holograms that we can use to fight for us. I used them for about 5 minutes until I outlawed them, and any new webs I would unlock in the future. I headed to Roxxon, and after hearing about the energy converter they had, I was put in a large fight. I'd also made a rule that I had to play everything on Spectacular, so here I had to make a real strategy. Normal throwable items wouldn't be enough to knock out every enemy here, so I needed to be able to beat them without actually depleting their health. I found that throwing objects at an enemy could make them fall and therefore letting me web them to the ground. But what if there are no objects left? Well, then I would lure them to the wall and web them there. After a nearly 20-minute fight, we head back home for Christmas dinner, where Miles shows off his amazing stealth skills. Uncle Aaron told us about some trains that weren't working, but to everyone's surprise, the underground was there. I beat them up as usual and fixed up the train. As it turns out though, the underground didn't appreciate this and decided to place bombs everywhere on the track. I quickly went there and fixed up everything like the master speedrunner I am. We met back up with Uncle Aaron, who found out who we are and gave us a subway pass. I went to the store where this man told me his cat named Spider-Man was gone. I needed to get it back from those thieves, so I went to their lair. This place is mostly just going room to room and fighting mobs of enemies, until I reached the last one. This man walked in stroking Spider-Man with a smug look on his face until I got there. He frowned. Some reinforcements came, and this part became pretty challenging. You can't knock down these big guys easily. Most throwable items won't do anything, so I have to wait to get lucky enough for something like another enemy bashing into them to win. On top of that, I have to juggle all the other smaller enemies in new waves. It was tough, but I was determined to rescue Spider-Man. So after around an hour, I got the win and saw the heartfelt reunion they had. After having a weird interaction with Finn, it's time to head to the rally. In the middle of our mom's speech, this laggy camera goofy interrupts us and has some more underground members emerge. It was tough, and there weren't that many throwable items, so it would take a while. But there are many gunned enemies spread out. Most of the normal enemies are fast, so I have to use the environment to my advantage. Swinging around will give me some time to recover and switch from the current situation. Also lower the hostility of the enemies I was fighting. The normal enemies weren't a huge worry, so that left 2 types. These jumping ones would follow me anywhere I tried to land. If I could get them alone, it would be fine. But the gunners are always aiming at me. If I went up to the gunners, the jumping ones would still be there, and I couldn't get much done anyway. I ended up killing the normal enemies and took the risk of trying to kill the gunners first, while trying my best to keep everyone else in check. After enough time it worked, and I was able to stall and lure the other enemies into the walls scar-free. Next up, I headed to the bridge where I ran into the same problems, just in a more narrow place. But I finished, got back home, and found the new suit. I know there's a rule that I can't switch suits, but I wasn't about to pass this up. I went to the shop where I saw the Finn breathing montage. Next up is Roxxon headquarters. We enter with the small task of beating some enemies, but once we get into the building, we're supposed to do lots of stealth takedowns and other things like that, but I can't do that, so camouflage just buys me a few seconds. Also, when in a closed, narrow area, I hardly have enough time to throw things before getting hit. We kept advancing through rooms until being introduced to the mine web, which explodes when an enemy comes near. At this point, the game is basically throwing every stealth mechanic it can find at me, but my sights didn't waver and I continued throwing weapons at everyone until they fell. But after this, I got to ride on top of the subway with Uncle Aaron and head to my meeting with Finn, where I asked her the question, "Will you let me into the underground?"
Are you serious, my brother?
I had to prove my loyalty to the cult by jumping off a crane. With this master espionage infiltration, I left and hopped in the suit. I was able to get in the main building and saw a large challenge ahead. With the amount of time it would take to beat an enemy, taking damage would be inevitable. So this was all about patience and knowing what risks to take. I also had to consider that damage could interrupt an animation, force me to abandon the situation. But everything here was possible, so I was able to get through quickly enough. All that was left here was stalking Finn and fighting some more bots. I took a quick trip to the theater where I was tasked with disabling the generators outside. This wasn't too too tough. There were just a lot of enemies, but it had a good environment. It allowed me to take out the snipers first, fairly peacefully. The main struggle was dealing with the large quantity of enemies that I had no way to knock down. When I would have two of these at once, I would have no way to lure one into the wall without dying or just falling, so I would have to wait minutes for both me and the enemy to simultaneously be in the perfect spot. After enough time, I got to the final generator, and this took a while, so my heart was beating pretty hard. But I ended up winning and was able to head to the theater in hopes of seeing some Shakespeare. Turns out Shakespeare was cancelled today, and Go Beat Some Random Ass People Up was playing instead. This place was basically hell. Tons of hard enemies, bad environment, and not enough throwable items. But after a long fight, the second phase started, and to ruin my day even more, they made it impossible. That's right, these shielded enemies are impossible to beat without venom, so I just had to do it normally. From here I met up with the Prowler, who made me do some weird sound puzzle thing, but either way, it let me progress to my meeting with Finn at the church, before a rhino came over and absolutely destroyed me. I woke up strapped to a chair in the creepy man's warehouse. Me and Finn wanted to have the collab of the century and joined forces to put an end to this man's shenanigans. I went into the first room and was having a good time until I accidentally threw this man and had to reset. I went back in after writing a 3-page apology letter about resorting to violence. I proceeded to give him 3 minor concussions and web him to a wall instead. I went to the next room and solved the puzzle just to be greeted by more enemies. I could tell they were filled with a fiery passion to make their boss proud, so I extinguished that.
Like, are you serious right now?
There weren't that many throwable items here, so I made sure to put them all to good use. Me and Finn menacingly walked into the next room where I found a rhino. Yeah, he bought a new skin in the store with the V-Bucks he found in the mall. But anyway, this fight was also impossible, but I do promise, some of these are. So after beating up Rhino in his weirdly long fight, Finn tries to kill him, and she didn't use a throwable object, so we weren't about to let that slide. She then beats me up and I teleport to the apartment with Genki. I was just swinging around until my uncle shot me and I woke up trapped in his room. Now we were at the Prowler fight. It had throwable items, just not enough of them. It wasn't possible, on Spectacular at least. If I turned it to the lowest difficulty, the first phase would just barely be possible. Once I got to the second phase, I noticed the items didn't respawn, but if I restart at the previous checkpoint, they're back. Third phase is where I really thought it would be impossible. After all, he has clones everywhere, but I still had enough items to win. Of course, being on a low difficulty, this wasn't that hard, so I don't have much more to say. Next up, the game asked me if I was ready for the end of the story. I accepted it and was faced with the most tedious part of this whole run. You see, in this place there are countless enemies, and some with snipers. Their damage is unrivaled. I couldn't stand a chance by just rushing in. I needed stealth, but of course I can't use stealth takedowns, so I needed a new way. For the snipers at the front, I would shoot a web next to a wall, have them walk there, and web them entirely to the wall. From here, I would camouflage and run away to avoid any risk. This was going fairly well until I noticed the enemies bunched up. Having 2 enemies at once wouldn't work for this strategy, but they're always on the ground, meaning I could knock them down with throwable objects. So I would do this like a normal fight, just with 1 enemy at a time, and a decent waiting time between each one to avoid risk. For the final enemies, I would have to wait for them to either come here or here. Lure them to the wall and web them. This part took a while, but after this long, I wasn't taking any risks. At long last, this challenge was done, but not without the price of losing 45 minutes of my life. I found Finn in the building and went to find our project at the Science Museum. We saw this man Peter Parker there too. We forgot to get tickets, but we finessed the system and scammed this man right here. Feeling a little bit guilty, I went back to the real world where Finn was trying to kill me, and she was really mad because she left some more of the impossible shield enemies. After beating them, I was brought to a room that was surprisingly difficult. This was a large room, but whenever I tried to lead a few enemies into the open part, there wasn't much to do. All the throwable items were up near the snipers, and that would be too crowded. It was really just 10 minutes of me running around thinking of what to do next. But eventually I won, and after one last room, I was done with this place. Next up, I found out there was a war in Harlem, so I came over and took care of the existing enemies. Some more came out, and this was just some fun fights since I had plenty of huge items. Once I finished up here, there were some enemies on the rooftops to take care of. These are always annoying since they don't have many throwable items, but luckily, almost everyone here had guns, so I could just knock them off the roof with those. From here, it was just a lot more of these fights until I reached the final standoff with Finn. Now on paper, the first phase would be impossible. After all, there are only a handful of throwable items. But when you go invisible, Finn throws some bombs, and they just happen to be the throwable kind. So this handles the first phase. But what about the second one? Well, camouflage doesn't work, but while switching sides of the battlefield, Finn plants a turret, which you can throw at her. It's not as easy as it sounds though, because it's a long animation, and these missiles show no mercy. Also at the very end, I don't know why, but Finn just started spamming the same attack. I stalled for like 10 minutes, but nothing changed. I had to do this normally, but luckily all it took was a single venom attack. Now finally, moving on to the third phase, I went back to the original strategy of camouflaging to throw these bombs. This worked for a while, but once again you're forced to attack at the end. But with this, Finn was done, and I was finally able to get the kill at the end of the game. So that's the end of the challenge, and if you want to see how I beat Pokemon without dealing damage, check out this video here.